Joe Mullings from 160 Studios. And my guest today, and I think is going to be my co host moving forward, is a good friend and certainly somebody I admire professionally, Stefan Kreuzer, who's generally out of Houston, Texas, but he is right now somewhere in Costa Rica, I'm told. Stefan, thanks for joining me this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Bet. So, Stefan, for those that are not aware of your background, you and I met about a year and change ago. You've got a phenomenal setup down in Houston, Texas, Innovate, and it's about a 40,000 square foot ASC, which is going to be the subject of our ongoing dialogue over time. But if you'd introduce yourself and a bit about your journey to date.
Yeah, I'm an orthopedic surgeon, and I focus mainly on hip and knee replacement. And I've had sort of maybe a little bit of roller coaster career. I was in private practice, and then I became employed by a big institution, and realized that over the years, with having more and more interest in health economics, that I was a significant contributor to increasing cost of care. So I tried to think of a new model on how we can really focus on still maintaining high quality care, but at a more cost effective approach. And so that's why we created Innovate. And really what Innovate is, it's a combination of a private practice group and an outpatient whole joint facility. And we're trying to partner with the different stakeholders in healthcare to create a more efficient way of providing great care at a reduced cost. And that's how we created the center that has a very high quality outpatient whole joint center in conjunction with the practice. So it's a one-stop shop.
Stefan, you have embraced, and you're going to be a little humble here, and I'd ask that you not be, but you've been on the leading edge of using technology, especially on the surgical robotics side, for many years. And maybe you could shed a little light on that, because that is very appropriate for the handling of technology, outcomes, and cost and value.
Yeah, and that's the biggest challenge in healthcare is in the current payer system, it's a flat fee that the facility gets paid, and any kind of increased cost really eliminates the profits. If you get paid $20,000, whether you use a $2,000 implant or a $4,000 implant with a computer navigation or robotic solution, you get paid the same. And so we've really embraced technology. I love technology. That's really what I did before I started doing this project. I was involved with a lot of the robotics companies and the FDA clearance studies. And so being a big fan of technologies, it's sort of a controversial or a challenge for me is, what's more important, profits or technology? And so we've always been of the belief that first comes patient care. If technology improves patient care, we're going to try to figure out how to make it work. And so that's why I believe this partnership with device companies is so critical to create the win-win situation.
So the great hospital disruption that's going on right now, especially in ambulatory surgical centers, ASCs, since the start of 2021, 80 plus have opened up, and there are 530 plus ASCs with total joint replacements in the US alone. Why do you think this trend has started and seems to be accelerating? Is it independent of us coming out of a pandemic, business model, or are there just some opportunities now that have not been present in the past?
Yeah, in the past, the total joint guys were always tied to a hospital, and it really started with the sports medicine guys. They were doing ACLs and knee scopes and all those outpatient procedures, but they were also doing the occasional partial knee replacement or total knee replacement. They really hated going to the hospital. So they started pushing the envelope and said, well, maybe we can do partial knee replacement in the surgery center. And sure enough, it was very successful. They were doing it because it's a little less of an operation and quick recovery and in younger patients. Then they said, well, why can't we do total knee replacements in an outpatient setting? And so they started doing that. And really with the advent of pain management, with the strong focus of reducing opioids and doing more of a regional anesthesia, it really was possible to bridge that first 24 to 48 hours of pain where you really did not need to be in a hospital. And then I think the economic part of it came on board on how this really can impact the not just cost of healthcare, but also the survival of the freestanding ASCs.
The alignment of incentives. So this is an interesting point. Whenever you get a transition in any type of business model or model of centers of care, you start to immediately have a misalignment of sort of the stakeholders. So, we've got surgeons, we've got facilities, we've got device companies, and we've got payers. And it doesn't appear that any of those, in fact, have an alignment of incentives. And so what should we be thinking about currently and be driving towards in regards to those alignments?
I think the most important thing about alignment is transparency. And that's been the biggest challenge for me in this model. If you don't really know what the cost is and where the spend is, it's hard to align. So that's number one. Number two is you have to get the stakeholders in the same room to discuss. And if you're not transparent, they're not going to share their information. So that's why I feel the transparency is so critical. Once you get in the same room to discuss the proposed model or the change in model, then I think you can start discussing on how to align incentives. And then once you've sort of figured that part out, then you can start scaling it up and making it mainstream. But those first two things have been a big challenge, and we are breaking through those. And because I have good relationships with payers and I have good relationship with device companies, I can be very, very open in my discussions regarding that.
Can you give me an example of perhaps you shared with me a number last year that Innovate had saved the system a substantial amount of money, and in turn, those involved, those stakeholders were thankful and shared that savings with you, thereby incentivized you. Would you like to go into some details on that? And is that unique to the excellence at Innovate, or is that attainable by most who have a conscious capitalism mindset in the industry?
Yeah, so the thing you're referring to is with Blue Cross Blue Shield. And they actually approached us on a shared savings program over a 3-year period. And the reason they picked us, since we were only 3 orthopedic surgeons, and there's a lot bigger fish to fry in the state of Texas, is because we created that alignment or that transparency early on in our project. We had conversations with them, we shared with them what we wanted to achieve, and they felt that was extremely refreshing. So it was an easy decision for them to come to us and say, look, we want to help you be successful in private practice because we believe in your model. Therefore, we'd like to share with you a program called the Shared Savings Program. And basically what that is they looked at historical spend of total joints. They subtracted a certain amount from it to set as the target price. Let's say the total spend is $32,000. They set the target price at $30,000. And then they said, okay, as long as you spend less than $30,000, provided you meet these targets of quality, we will share with you that savings. And so that turned out in our second year, because of the shift of the cases from the hospital to the surgery center, we saved them close to $1 million, and we got to save almost half of that. So in some insurance plans, it was 50%. Some of the Obamacare plans, it was only 30% because they had less of a profit margins on that. So they only shared 30% of the savings. And it was a win-win. And in that model, we didn't even have to take risks. So if we were to spend more, it didn't really matter. But because we saved them money, they shared some of that savings back to us. And especially during the pandemic, that was extremely helpful to get that check from them to get us over the hump.
So how does a facility like Innovate and your partners and all the stakeholders in Innovate, how would you describe your ability to save that kind of money? 7 figures is big, right? So how does that occur? Is it technology? Is it the staff you put together? Is it processes? Is it predictive analytics? What are you incorporating, just without giving away all the secret sauce, which I know you're super generous, but what are the big rocks that you keep your eyes on?
It's actually not that difficult. It goes back to transparency. If I know that when I send a patient to a freestanding physical therapy facility, the cost to the payer is going to be around $80 to $100. If I send it to a physical therapy facility of a large hospital system, it'll be $300. Well, since I know that, again, transparency, I can then shift care to lower cost facilities. Now, if I get a report back from my patient that therapist isn't any good, then I'm not going to send it there, because then he has to go more often, which again increases the cost and reduces my portion of the savings. So there's a really good synergy there for providing excellent care, because then you have to use less care at a lower cost. It's really not difficult, as long as you know. And we physicians don't. I mean, if I ask physicians, do you know what it costs to do a total joint in a hospital? I bet you 95% of physicians have no idea. They don't even know what implants cost. And so that's, again, the degree of transparency is not available as it needs to be. And even though policies has been passed regarding transparency, it's impossible to figure it out on the websites and the maze that is created by the healthcare systems.
And that maze and sort of lack of transparency does serve some people, though, doesn't it, Stefan?
Well, it does, because a confusing system is difficult to figure out, and people just sort of throw up their hands and say, look, I can't figure this out. I'm just going to do the path of least resistance. And if I only have to wait 15 minutes at the hospital to get my MRI, I'm going to go to the hospital, because I don't really pay for it. It's my employer that pays for it. And that begs, I'm sure, a question that you're going to ask sooner or later is the market forces in healthcare are just very, very different. He who receives the product doesn't pay for it. They pay for the copay, but not the actual cost. So if my copay is $20 and I get an MRI at a facility where it costs $1,500, it doesn't matter to me at all, because I only pay $20 copay. Whereas there's another facility that it might cost $300. And again, that is the other variable that makes healthcare so difficult, is that the market forces are different.
Yeah, I think you would share with me a story, and I've heard it from others, is I can go for a hip implant in the same zip code and have a diversity of offerings up to 30 to 40% on the cost for the same hip implant or knee implant.
Yeah, and it's in some areas it's 300 to 400%. In the Houston market, a total hip replacement in network. This is not out of network, and that's, I think, important to know, because out of network the variability is even bigger. But in network, it can vary as low as Medicare prices of $8,800 to as high as United Healthcare prices of $50,000. And I've seen that black and white on EOB, so I know this is a fact.
So again, another classic of rewards and consequences will drive behavior. If you're getting rewarded for something, you'll go towards it. If you're facing a consequence, you'll move away from it. And it doesn't seem like, as you put it, the market forces in healthcare seem to be operating from a different value prop.
Exactly right.
And yours and mine discussions around ASCs and the business model, there'll be times I'll ask you some controversial questions that I think are important for all of us in the health tech, med tech industry to understand is, how do you think the large device manufacturers are going to respond to this transition to the ASCs from the hospital setting, and the entire capability of them being able to bundle now starts to become compromised, perhaps, right? So we already know that some med device manufacturers who make navigation or robotic systems will only sell you the device at a certain price if you guarantee a certain number of uses of their specific implant. And so therefore they're getting that bundle value back to them one way or another. Yet I do know there are some ASCs that have found implants from other sort of manufacturers that are superior in nature, or even design them superior in nature, yet are not allowed to be used or preferred not to be used by the navigation or robotic provider. So would you want to have a conversation about that?
Yeah, and I'm on several advisory board of device companies, and that's something we frequently discuss. Again, because I'm very honest and transparent, and the device companies really don't want to hear that, but they have to. The the customer that they sell to has now changed. It used to be the hospital administrator, and the hospital administrator they don't quite understand. They really only care about cost, and they'll bundle things together and say, okay, we'll give you a discount here if you pay us more here, and so forth. In the surgery center, the president of the device company I use has to look me in the eye, because the more I pay him, the less margin the facility does, especially if we're getting paid less by the payers. Again, there I think the solution to this problem is to align the incentives between the device companies and the facility to, for example, reduce inventory in the field. Right now, when I do a hip replacement on a female, I know with high degree of certainty that the cup size is going to be either a 48, a 50, or a 52, very rarely a 54 millimeter in diameter. Despite that, every time I do a hip on a female, they bring all sizes from 44 to 68, which is an enormous amount of inventory in the field. And so we need to work with the device companies to reduce inventory in the field. With one of the technology we currently use called OPS, we actually know from a CT scan preoperatively that it's going to be a 58. Every once in a while, it may be a 60. So it's within two sizes 100% of the time. So you could literally do a case and only bring two cups. That saves the device companies an enormous amount of money that's sitting out there generating no revenue. And that's the discussions we need to have with the device companies, that by eliminating some of the inefficiencies in the system will improve their bottom line per surgery, even though the cost of the device may be lower.
And then as we look at the path or the journey of the patient between pre and then post and then rehab, you're owning that patient journey from nearly start to finish in the Innovate model, where those in the hospital, without being too obscene about it, once the surgeon walks out the door, his or her sort of connectivity to the cost impact to the system, which is now 18% of our GDP, sort of disappears, doesn't it?
Correct. Yeah, and then again, that's where as you mentioned earlier, if we incorporate technology that improves the outcome, where the patient has to have fewer physical therapy visits, that helps me financially, helps the patient from a quality standpoint, and again aligns that incentive again. So, and that's what I'm hoping is that if we figure this out in the ASC, maybe we can also figure it out with a hospital as a partner, right? Because we have to be conscientious of hospitals. They can't go out of business. We need them, and that's something that you had addressed very nicely on our panel that we discussed. That we need to also be conscientious of supporting the hospital, but they need to come to the table. They need to be part of these discussions so that they can do well as well in this new model and this new alignment of incentives.
This new model of incentives and this new model of centers of care has shifted dramatically since, let's call it March of 2020. Centers of care have switched to our living rooms with telehealth, with companies like Avail Med Systems, who has a telehealth play. We've got Proximy with Nadine Hashash-Haram, who is now able to dial in around the globe, and we're saving money there of having number of areas. We can't even go beyond the medtech, health tech field, but we can go into insurers and free up of capital and being able to, with a higher level of predictability, figure out how much cash we have to tie up from a liability perspective in those areas. But these centers of care now, let's keep it down on the ASCs, which is really what yours and mine focus is going to be in these centers of care. We've got private equity coming into this model right now, buying up real estate. We've got private equity now investing back into the docs, the clinicians, for a longer term cash flow, and hopefully some conscious capitalism, as you and I call it, in that model. What do you forecast, and what should we be keeping our eyes on as you're an early mover in this model? And again, it's not new that docs have owned their own practice before in surgery centers, but it's changed dynamically over the last 5 to 7 years. Would you agree?
Yes, and 70% of physicians are now either employed or are part of a private equity firm, which shows that the old model of private practice and owning a small piece in a surgery center is going to go away because it's not survivable. Uh, and so that's why I do think our model is somewhat unique. And the nice thing about capital is that you can create those efficiencies in order to provide the revenue streams that you can't survive in private practice. And so I'd love to have some PE people on this panel sometimes in the future to kind of see where they're going and are they interested in just the bottom line and EBITDA, or are they really interested in providing the capital to change the model or to change the setup on how the alignment of incentives will create a better mousetrap?
Hmm. And my guess is that the PE firms will be getting into this because I'm watching more and more of the bundling of business model, not necessarily bundling as it relates to you and I may know it in the medical device industry of syringes, gauzes, implants, drapes, et cetera, from some of our bigger strategics. But I'm seeing PE firms now roll up medtech companies that are selling sutures or other high-end commodity, knowing that disruption is coming to the sales process within the medtech industry, that the big juggernauts are even being brought to court right now in regards to bundling strategies as anti-competitive type ploys under a sort of smuggled under a different business model. And then you look at the big players, Amazon and Walmart have entered into the virtual health and the clinic markets. And right now that is a really interesting sort of scenario to watch when you look at the pure scale of them as an employer and you look at the pure scale of them as a brick and mortar, which are commutable to most even rural centers these days, which is really a sort of an underserved market of access to really good healthcare. So if you've got these large multi-trillion-dollar juggernauts involved and PE is sliding in now, what do you think that's going to do, Stefan, from your perspective, to the device manufacturers that you've been dealing with for quite a while?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think the things we can learn or that's exciting of getting an Amazon or a Walmart to be part of this journey is that they've figured out logistics. They are fanatical about efficiency, about delivery, about customer care, and so forth. The device companies, they're a little bit different. They have been somewhat, I don't want to use the word arrogant, but maybe complacent because they have such incredibly high margins and they've really only had to deal with hospital systems. So it's going to be a little bit of a shock to them if this really goes in big scales on how they need to change their model. But they have a lot of resources and they'll figure it out. And at the end of the day is they need to be part of this. They need to partner with physicians and they need to partner with this new model. I think as long as we keep the patient as the most important spoke in the wheel, that the patient care cannot be compromised, and that we focus on providing excellent care, then everybody will sort of find their little niche and their little model of still being highly profitable while reducing the healthcare costs. So I think it's really exciting to be part of this right now because it's going to ruffle some feathers. And I'm so glad that you're kind of taking the bull by the horn to educate and get people involved because that creates that transparency that's so much needed.
And then you and I, through this series, will consistently come back to the three items I think that we have to answer in the healthcare industry: access, outcomes, and value. And I know those are top of the list for you and Innovate. And again, I've been there and incredibly impressed with it and your forward thinking on it. So I am going to look forward to adding device manufacturers, private equity, investors, other clinicians, and anybody else I'm leaving out that are those and payers. Let's get
Yeah.
Blue Cross Blue Shield in here, and let's get some of the courageous dialogue going out online that everybody knows should be going on, but is left behind the curtain right now.
No, it's great, and hopefully we can make a small dent in this vision or movement forward to creating a better system.
Well, I do appreciate you carving out time. I know I stole you away from your family down there in Costa Rica. I think it's still early enough. You can either go out surfing or fishing, whatever you have on the agenda today.
Actually, I think I'm going to swing a golf club. I really have to because I'm terrible and I need to get better. Well,
Well,
thank
as
you so
you,
much, Joe. It's always a pleasure.
I appreciate it, Stefan. All the best to you and the family.
Thank you.
You bet. This is Joe Mullings from 160 Studios. Be well.